The judge mocked a maid in court, until she whispered a name that silenced the entire room. The courtroom was packed, a humid buzz of anticipation humming through the air like static before a storm. Flashes from press cameras bounced off the wooden walls, journalists scribbling notes, murmuring names, scanning the front row for any sign of Lagos high society. People were not here because they believed justice would be served. They were here because the accused was a maid, and the accused had stolen from the Adesinas. That name alone was enough to draw half of Victoria Island into the courthouse. Justice Barama Enatimi leaned back in his leather chair, a thin smile playing across his face. His robe, jet black and starched at the collar, seemed to hang with the weight of centuries. He adjusted his glasses and peered down at the trembling figure before him. Miss Ekanem, or shall I say Eno-Abasi, the Blessed One, he said mockingly, emphasizing the meaning of her name with a smirk. You stand accused of theft, a diamond brooch, valued at 14.6 million naira. Do you understand the gravity of this offense? Eno-Abasi swallowed hard. She was no more than 21. Her hands clutched the court-assigned microphone like a lifeline. She didn't look like a thief. She looked like a ghost, thin, hollow-cheeked, but with a defiant pulse beating somewhere deep in her eyes. I didn't take anything, she whispered, her voice cracking. I swear on my mother's grave. Justice Barama chuckled, tapping his gavel twice, not for order, but for drama. Swearing on graves doesn't change facts, Miss Ekanem. Perhaps you thought no one would notice a missing diamond in a house that large. Or perhaps you believed your poverty gave you a right to reach for what you could never afford. Gasps rippled through the gallery. A woman in a coral jewel clicked her tongue. A man in Agbada whispered to his friend. They should send her straight to Kirikiri. But Eno-Abasi wasn't listening anymore. Her eyes, swollen from days without sleep, darted toward the prosecutor's table. Then, to the clock. Then, to the judge. Something passed across her face, a flicker of pain, then clarity, then something colder. She bent slightly toward the microphone, her lips trembling. Your Honor, she said slowly, may I speak freely? Justice Barama raised an eyebrow. You've spoken nothing but fiction thus far, Miss Ekanem, but by all means, entertain us. She drew in a slow breath. The room quieted. For a second, all that could be heard was the clicking of the stenographer's keyboard. And then, she whispered a name. Just a name. It wasn't loud, it wasn't screamed, but it landed like a thunderclap. Every movement ceased. The stenographer stopped mid-word. The prosecutor froze. Someone dropped a pen in the gallery and didn't dare pick it up. The murmurs died instantly, replaced by an eerie silence thick enough to slice. Justice Barama blinked. Once. Twice. His face drained of color. He sat upright, no longer leaning back in arrogance. His hand reached instinctively toward his gavel, but didn't strike. The name she had whispered had not been heard in public in over a decade. Not since the oil block scandal. Not since the BDC fraud cases that disappeared mysteriously. Not since the 3 journalists who had all died in accidents within the same month. The name was a ghost, a myth, a dagger. Bailiff, the judge croaked, voice barely audible. Clear the court. Immediate recess. But, Your Honor, the prosecutor began. I said recess, Justice Barama shouted, slamming the gavel now in panic. The bailiffs rushed forward, shooing media out, dragging cameras away, whispering into radios. Lawyers shuffled out, visibly shaken. No one dared look directly at Eno-Abasi as they passed. She was no longer the maid on trial. She was something else now, something unpredictable. The courtroom emptied like a sinking ship. As she was escorted out, handcuffed loosely, a hush followed her. The journalists outside, previously eager to splash her name on headlines like Maid of Shame, were now whispering feverishly, calling their editors, checking databases. Who's the man? One asked another. What did she say? I swear she said. I know what she said, the other interrupted. But we don't write that name unless we want our offices burnt down. Outside, the sky was already shifting. The heavy clouds that had loomed all morning began to part slightly, allowing a pale shaft of sunlight to fall right at the court's steps. Eno-Abasi stepped into it slowly. She blinked against the brightness, the cuffs now removed, Her breath came in short gasps. Not fear, not yet. Something closer to release. She paused on the last step, turned slightly, and looked back. Inside that building, men had judged her, laughed at her accent, mocked her worn slippers, assumed she was too simple to understand the weight of power. They had forgotten she was her mother's daughter. They had forgotten she had been listening, every night, while dusting corridors, every morning, while serving tea. Every time they whispered what they believed no one could hear, she had heard it. Now, she had spoken a name, and that name had power. As the wind lifted the edge of her wrapper, she walked away from the courthouse, not broken, not defeated, but reassembled, piece by piece. Inside, Justice Barama locked himself in his chambers. He poured a glass of brandy, his hand shaking so hard half of it spilled on his robe. He sat down slowly, heart pounding. That girl knew something, and if she knew it, others might too. The door to his office creaked. A junior clerk stepped in, his eyes wide. "Sir, there's a call for you. From Abuja." He said she mentioned him. Barima's glass dropped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor. Who was the man behind the name? And what power did he hold over a federal judge? Long before she ever stood in front of that judge, long before whispers silenced a courtroom and shook the corridors of power, Eno-Abasi Ekanem was a barefoot child running through the red dust of Eno-Abasi, a place where children learned to read under the mango tree, and dinner often depended on the mood of the clouds. If the rain was good, the cassava would rise. If not, they went to bed with hunger wrapped around their ribs like second skin. Her grandmother, Mama Mfon, was a pillar in the village, stubborn, sharp-tongued, with hands hardened from years of pounding yam and raising orphans. She had taken in Eno-Abasi after the girl's mother Arit had died under strange and whispered circumstances. A sudden illness, they said. But Mama Mfon always believed she was poisoned. Arit had been asking too many questions, traveling too frequently to Uyo and Calabar, coming home with silent eyes and bruises she refused to explain. Eno didn't remember much of her mother, just the way she used to hum hymns at dusk, and the scent of bitter leaf soup wafting through their small compound. But what she remembered clearly was the day they buried her. Rain fell as though the sky wept with them, and a man in a black SUV stayed parked far down the village road, engine running, windows tinted. From then, Eno grew up carrying two weights, the burden of her brilliance, and the shadow of a mother whose death no one dared to discuss. She was the brightest girl in school, always first in class, always curious. She read everything from borrowed novels to discarded newspapers lining the market stalls. Teachers said she had a future, but brilliance without money in Nigeria is like a flame in the wind, seen, admired, and quickly snuffed out. When her WAEC results came back with flying colors but no sponsorship for university, Eno resigned herself to helping Mama Mfon sell vegetables in the market, until a woman named Auntie Riri arrived. Tall, flashy, and full of smiles, Riri claimed to be a recruiter for domestic work in Lagos. "Your girl will be treated like family," she told Mama Mfon. "The madam is nice, the oga is quiet. They'll pay her monthly and she'll live in a big house. Air conditioner. Food 3 times a day. Everything legit." Mama Mfon hesitated, but poverty has a way of choking reason. 2 weeks later, Eno boarded a rickety bus at the Uyo terminal, clutching a plastic bag of clothes, a Bible, and the only photo she had of her mother. The journey to Lagos took 16 hours, and by the time she stepped off the bus at Ojota, Lagos had already started to swallow her. The city was nothing like the village. It roared, it honked, it never slept. There were bridges in the sky and water below the roads. Men yelled in rapid Yoruba she couldn't understand. Women pushed past her with tired children and plastic bags. Lagos had no time for softness. But then she saw it, the compound that would become her new world. The Adesina mansion. Set on a private corner of Banana Island, the house looked like it belonged in another country. A driveway that could fit 15 cars, glass walls that reflected the sky, an infinity pool that looked like it could drown all her village. The doors didn't use keys, they used fingerprints. There was a coldness to the beauty. Everything too perfect, too quiet. She was led to the staff quarters behind the house. Small but clean, at least it had electricity. That night, she lay on the lower bunk of a shared room, staring at the ceiling fan and wondering if this new life would ever feel real. Her first days were a blur of instructions. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't enter the master wing. Call her Madame Amaka, never just Amaka. And then there was him. Seyi Adesina, young, tall, with caramel-toned skin and eyes that never stayed long in one place. He barely spoke. Always on video calls, always flying to Dubai, San Francisco, Abuja. The entire staff called him Sir, even in his absence. He had made billions from a mobile payments app and now ran a digital investment empire spanning 3 continents. Eno tried to remain invisible. She cleaned, she cooked, she scrubbed floors. She kept her head low. But sometimes, when she thought no one was listening, she would hum old hymns or recite lines from novels she still remembered. And one evening, while folding laundry in the hallway, she didn't realize Seyi was standing behind her. "That book," he said, pointing at the small paperback beside her. "Half of a Yellow Sunday, you read that?" She froze. "Yes, sir. You understand it?" "Yes, sir." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something like curiosity passing through his otherwise guarded face. "Interesting." From then, he would occasionally drop comments. A quote from Achebe, a reference to Soyinka. Once, he left a copy of The Alchemist near the laundry area with a small, sticky note, "For the dreamer." But what blossomed quietly in Seyi seemed to rot loudly in Amaka. Madame Amaka was beautiful in a dangerous way. Skin like polished bronze, lashes long enough to cast shadows. She wore designer caftans even while screaming at staff. She treated maids like furniture and treated guests like business opportunities. When she noticed her husband lingering in conversation with a housemaid, a village girl, something inside her snapped. First came the accusations. "This girl used my Chanel perfume. She misplaced my Versace scarf. She left fingerprints on the wine glasses." Every small mistake became a mountain. Eno was blamed, berated, once slapped, but Seyi never said a word, until that one night. It was past midnight. Eno had gone to get water when she heard voices echoing from the private study, Seyi and someone on speakerphone. She shouldn't have stopped. But something in the tension of his voice made her pause just beyond the slightly ajar door. "Barama is asking for more," said the caller. "He said if we don't deliver before month end, he'll make the past look like mercy." "I already gave him the land title," Seyi snapped. "What else does he want? He wants silence. And leverage. He's afraid someone's digging." A pause. "And what about the girl?" Seyi's voice dropped lower. "She doesn't know anything. She's just a reminder." Eno backed away before they could hear her breath catch. Barama. She knew that name. She had seen it once, years ago, in her mother's journal, scribbled next to the words Uyo transfer and missing funds. She barely slept that night. Her hands trembled. Her chest felt too tight. Her mother had died chasing a truth, and somehow the Adesinas and Justice Barama were tangled in that same web. What secret deal connects the judge, her employer, and the murder of her mother years ago? The air inside the Adesina mansion was thick with imported perfume, politics, and power. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, throwing light across a sea of silk gowns, tuxedos, and calculating eyes. Waiters moved in choreographed precision, their trays balancing glasses of champagne and exotic canapés. It was a night of appearances, a curated gathering of Lagos's elite under one opulent roof. Eno-Abasi wore a crisp black uniform, her hair tied in a tight bun, her expression unreadable. But beneath the facade of calm, her heart pounded, her fingers trembled slightly as she balanced a tray of drinks. She moved from guest to guest with the grace of someone trying to disappear into the background, and yet she was everywhere. Listening, Justice Barama stood near the arched window, laughing in his forced, booming cadence. His eyes, however, darted constantly, never resting, always calculating. To his left, a senator from Delta State whispered something about a missing oil block license. To his right, a European investor bragged about laundering funds through emerging fintech ecosystems. Words floated around Eno like ghosts offshore: shell companies, ballot warehouses, protection. She wasn't supposed to hear these things, but she had learned how to listen without moving, how to remember entire conversations with just a glance. And then came the moment. She was returning from the dining room when a hand gripped her wrist firm, but not cruel. She turned. A man stood in the hallway, wearing a dark gray caftan and a black velvet masquerade mask. His eyes were sharp, too sharp. The music in the main hall muffled their corner. "Your name is Eno-Abasi, yes?" he said in a low voice. She froze. "You don't know me, but I knew your mother." Her throat tightened. She was brave. She died because she wouldn't stop asking questions. "Leave this place, child, before they do to you what they did to her." He released her wrist gently and walked away, disappearing into the crowd like a wraith. She stood there, breath caught between panic and revelation. The masked guest, her mother. This house. Before she could move, Sayedisina appeared around the corner, his voice low but firm. "Who was that man?" Eno couldn't answer. She shook her head. "I saw him grab you. What did he say?" Her silence must have unnerved him. For the first time, there was a crack in his polished exterior, a flicker of something like fear. Later that evening, Sayi pulled Justice Barima aside. The two men spoke in hushed tones near the wine cellar. Eno passed by just close enough to hear fragments. "This wasn't part of the arrangement. You're slipping, Sayi. Your father kept things cleaner than this. Don't bring him into this." That name again. His father. She remembered what Mama Mafon had once said during one of her feverish rambles. They made her disappear, just like they made his father disappear. All of them, tied by blood and betrayal. Sayi's father died years ago under suspicious circumstances. Officially, it was heart failure. Unofficially, everyone knew there had been threats, scandal, and a quiet burial with no autopsy. The man had been on the verge of exposing land corruption involving several high-profile judges, including Justice Barima. But nothing ever came of it. Case closed, silence sealed. Now, it made sense why Barima was always at the mansion. Why Amaka walked like she owned more than the house. Why Sayi looked like a man always at war with himself. Eno couldn't breathe. Everything was unraveling. The next morning, she packed her few belongings and went to the kitchen to tell the house manager she was quitting. Amaka intercepted her before she could speak. "Going somewhere, house girl?" "I want to leave, Ma," Eno said carefully. Amaka's smile was cold. "Leave? After you've been snooping around like a rat?" "I haven't." She didn't get to finish. Two armed security guards stepped into the hallway behind Amaka. "This girl has been stealing," she said casually. "Take her to the store, lock her in. We'll call police in the morning." "What?" "I didn't." Eno's voice was drowned by her own panic. They dragged her across the tiled corridor. The storeroom was cold, windowless, filled with cleaning supplies and old suitcases. The door slammed shut behind her. Darkness swallowed her. She sat in the silence, heart pounding. No tears came. Just the rising scream inside her chest that no one would hear, until hours later, when she heard the soft creak of the lock turning. It was Uncle Agbo, the aging driver with slow limbs and tired eyes. He opened the door just enough to whisper, "Go, now, before Madam wakes. Use the back gate." She ran. No shoes, no bag. Just the photo of her mother tucked into her blouse. She ran past the garden, past the generator house, through the narrow hedge separating the compound from the main road. The Lagos air slapped her face. No one followed. Not yet. That night she slept in the back of a keke parked near Aja Bridge. By morning she walked barefoot to a small police outpost. But when she got there and opened her mouth, nothing came out. She had no proof, no video, no files. Just names, whispers, suspicion. And in Nigeria, Names without evidence were like rain without clouds. Dismissed. Mocked. Forgotten. The officer on duty looked at her like she was mad. You say Justice Barima? Say Adesina? You sure say nah your head, correct? She left, humiliated. Angry. At a roadside kiosk, she borrowed a stranger's phone to check her own number. One message, a private number. Go to court. Say his name. Her blood ran cold. Someone was still watching her. A message arrives on her phone from a private number. Go to court. Say his name. The house was hidden behind high white walls, deep in the outskirts of Lekki, far from the eyes of cameras and the whispers of power. Eno-Abasi stood at the threshold, unsure whether to step in. Everything about the mansion screamed isolation, quiet corridors, bulletproof windows, and silence that felt rehearsed. Seyi had brought her here the day after the court hearing. You're not safe, he said. Not now. Inside, the house felt less like a refuge and more like a waiting room between two storms. But for the first time in weeks, Eno had her own bed, a window overlooking the sea, and a locked door that wasn't meant to keep her in. She was still reeling from what had happened in court, from Seyi's unexpected intervention, from the silence that followed the name Otunba Kasim, and from her own confusion about who Seyi really was and what he truly wanted. But he gave her space. They spent days navigating the silence with small offerings. Books, tea, music, playing faintly through hidden speakers. At night, they sat on the veranda overlooking the ocean, where the breeze cut through the heat and their truths began to unravel. Seyi told her about his father, about how he'd been on the verge of exposing a syndicate involved in illegal oil blocks and national treasury siphoning. How his death had come just days before a press conference that never happened, about how Justice Barima had presided over the case and closed it within 48 hours, citing insufficient evidence. He was poisoned, Seyi said one night, staring at the waves. I've never been able to prove it, but I know it. And your marriage? Eno asked carefully. Seyi chuckled bitterly. Amaka's father was a former state commissioner. She came with connections, money, influence. It wasn't love. It was strategy. And a mistake. Eno remained quiet. She understood too well how power used people like chess pieces. Over time, their conversations deepened. They talked about their mothers, about growing up under shadows, about carrying burdens that didn't belong to them. Eno found herself laughing again hesitantly, then freely. Seyi listened to her, not just with his ears, but with that rare attentiveness that made her feel seen. One night, after a long conversation about injustice and dreams deferred, he reached out and took her hand. I don't want to hide anymore, he whispered. She looked at him, eyes wide, trembling, and then he kissed her. Soft, gentle, real. For a moment, the world vanished. For a moment, she let herself feel what she'd buried under years of survival. But just as quickly, she pulled away. I can't, she said, tears in her eyes. I don't know who to trust. I don't even know who I am anymore. Seyi didn't press. He nodded, gently stepping back. I'll wait, he said. But the world, as always, didn't wait for them. The next morning, a sealed envelope arrived at the gate. No return address. Inside were 6 photos. Her grandmother, Mama Mfon, bound and gagged in a dark room, her eyes swollen. Blood on her temple. A single note. Leave Lagos. Or we bury her too. Eno collapsed to the floor. Her world tilted. Rage replaced fear. Seyi tried to calm her. I'll get her back, I swear it. But Eno looked at him with fire. Number, we keep going. We finish this. They want me scared. I'm done being scared. They doubled their efforts. Seyi brought in Tolu Odigwe again, who began tracing property records and financial trails left behind by Otunba and Barima. They hacked into dormant databases from a now-defunct oil company once chaired by Sei's father. And then, in a stroke of fate, they stumbled upon it. An old 1999 Peugeot 406, parked in the Adesina family's ancestral compound in Abeokuta, a relic no one touched, covered in dust, rusting with time. Inside the glove compartment, wrapped in a brown envelope, they found a flash drive. Sei's father had hidden it there, just weeks before his death. Back at the safe house, they connected it to an isolated laptop. The screen flickered to life. Video footage. Grainy, but clear enough. A room. A wooden table. 3 men and a woman. Barama. Amaka. Otunba Kasim. And Sei's father. The conversation was damning. "You said the funds were secure," Sei's father said, voice firm. Otunba responded with a smirk. "We had to reroute. Some of the money is going to Kano. There are elections coming." "This wasn't the deal," Sei's father said. "We agreed on transparency." Barima interjected coldly. "You're becoming a liability." Then Amaka, in a voice as smooth as silk, leaned forward. "Maybe we need to take care of this, permanently." The video cut there. Eno's hands trembled. Her stomach turned. Sei didn't speak. He stared at the screen for a long time before turning it off. "They killed him," he said, voice hoarse. "My wife helped kill my father." Eno stood, fists clenched. "We need to release this." But Tolu shook his head. "Not yet. We need to prepare. This kind of evidence doesn't just destroy careers, it starts wars." Eno stared out the window. Her grandmother was still missing. But now, she held the match. And Lagos was soaked in gasoline. Will this evidence be enough, or is someone in Sei's circle about to betray them? The first sign came in a glass of Zobo. Eno had returned to the safe house from a short walk, her mind spinning with thoughts of her grandmother, the flash drive, and the secret web of betrayal. The drink was already waiting on the kitchen table, cold, dark, and still sweating from condensation. A housekeeper had left it there, smiling as she passed. Eno took a single sip before her tongue began to tingle. She paused, looked at the glass, then ran to the sink and poured the rest down the drain. By the time Sei got home, she was curled up on the bathroom floor, sweating and gasping for air. He rushed her to a private clinic under a fake name. The doctors confirmed it traces of rat poison mixed with camphor, enough to kill slowly, invisibly. "Someone inside the house tried to kill you," Sei said, his voice trembling with rage. They reviewed security footage. It showed the housekeeper chatting amiably with Kazim, Sei's chief of security. Kazim, the man who had once sworn on his mother's life that he would die for the Adesina family, the man who knew every blind spot in their surveillance systems, who had access to all entries, exit logs, and schedules. Sei fired him on the spot, but it was too late. The infection had already spread. 2 days later, Tolu Odigwe vanished. He was last seen getting into his car after a strategy meeting in Yaba. The car was found hours later, empty, driverless, blood on the door handle. For 48 hours, no one heard a word. And then, at dawn on the 3rd day, he stumbled into a police checkpoint in Sagamu, limping, bruised, and bleeding from the mouth. His nails had been ripped off, his feet beaten, but he was alive. "They asked about the flash drive," he whispered. "They know what we found." Sei's company was the next target. An anonymous leak flooded social media and the financial press allegations of tax evasion, shell companies, offshore laundering. Overnight, Adesina Tech's stock plummeted, investors panicked, employees resigned, contracts were suspended. What had taken Sei 7 years to build began to collapse in hours. It was sabotage from the inside. They traced the breach to a junior software engineer, a young man on contract who had recently received a suspicious 50 million naira deposit from an untraceable account in Dubai. Sei knew what this meant. The inner circle was no longer safe. That night, they left Lagos in silence, no phone calls, no messages, no goodbyes. A private boat carried them across dark waters to a secluded island off the coast of Calabar. It was an old colonial resort once owned by a friend of Sei's late father. Now abandoned, it became their haven. The sea roared against the shore like it was trying to warn them. The nights were long, the stars sharp and bright, but for the first time, Eno could breathe. Here, on the edge of the world, she gave Sei her mother's full journal. Every page she had hidden, every note her mother had written in frantic, slanted handwriting documents, voices, license plate numbers, backroom deals, payoffs to judges. Sei read through it slowly, piece by piece, as if finally meeting the ghost that had haunted her daughter for 20 years. She was a warrior, he said, tears in his eyes. Eno nodded, and they crushed her. Meanwhile, Amaka was moving like a serpent through the corridors of power. She bribed a senator with compromising footage video of him in a hotel room with an underage girl, and in exchange, he moved a motion that revoked Sei's financial operator's license. Overnight, Adesina Tech was blacklisted from every Nigerian banking system. Sei stared at the television screen in disbelief. "I can't fix this. I can't rebuild. It's over." "You can't. Run," Eno said quietly. "If you leave now, they win. They'll rewrite the story. Again." Her words stirred something in him, not just resolve but clarity. So, they acted. They took the flash drive, burned it onto 5 different USBs, sent each one through separate courier services, anonymous, untraceable, addressed to journalists, lawyers, and one special package to the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC. The impact was immediate. By the next morning, every news outlet in Nigeria exploded with headlines. Former minister linked to murder plot, secret syndicate exposed, oil contracts, political cover-ups, and bribes. Barama, Otunba, and Amaka named in corruption video. Television anchors stammered through the footage, some too afraid to comment on the implications. Hashtags like Number the Flash Drive and Number Justice for Arit trended globally. The EFCC raided 6 properties, froze 29 accounts, and invited Barama for questioning. But the real terror still waited in silence. In a penthouse high above Victoria Island, Amaka sat in a wine-colored dress, legs crossed, sipping from a crystal glass. Across from her, Otunba Kasim stood by the window, watching the chaos unfold below. "We underestimated the girl," Amaka said. Otunba didn't respond. "She's getting too much attention. Journalists want interviews. The world is watching." He turned slowly. "If the maid speaks again," he said coldly, "she dies." Eno returned to Lagos the following week. They had no choice. With the indictments heating up, and the public now rallying behind the truth, she had to give a sworn statement in person. They stayed in a high-rise apartment under alias names. Tolu was still recovering, but sent word he had mobilized protective surveillance. Eno stood by the window that evening, staring at the skyline. So much had changed, and yet beneath the surface, she could still feel it, that slithering shadow of danger. The lights flickered, then returned. She didn't notice the glint from across the street. A rooftop, a figure prone, a sniper scope adjusting. The red dot hovered on her chest. A sniper scope focuses on Eno's window as she returns to Lagos. The sniper's breath was steady. 1 heartbeat. 2. He exhaled. Fired. But just as the bullet sliced through the dusk, Sei lunged forward, an instinct that didn't ask for permission. He threw his body over Eno's just as the glass shattered behind them, the bullet lodging in the bookshelf inches away. Another shot cracked the air, but by then, they were already on the floor. Blood bloomed on Sei's arm. The room erupted in chaos. Bodyguards stormed in, dragging them to the ground, shielding them with Kevlar vests. Eno's scream pierced the room as she pressed her hands against the blood. Sei's face twisted in pain, but he kept whispering, "You're okay. I'm okay. Just stay down." Within minutes, the sniper was gone, vanished into the Lagos night. At the hospital, Sei was stitched and stabilized. The bullet had missed bone, but not by much. The doctors said he was lucky. Eno sat beside him, numb. Another man had nearly died for her. It was too much. In the quiet of the hospital room, her fingers trembled as she reached for his hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I keep bringing danger. Maybe if I leave, you leave," Seyi cut in, eyes tired but firm, "and they win." She nodded, swallowing back tears. But the weight in her chest didn't ease. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the blood. She saw Seyi collapse. She saw her mother's grave. While Seyi healed, the world moved. Justice Barima held a press conference in Abuja. He appeared older, weaker, his speech slow, his frame thinner. He announced his resignation from the bench, citing persistent health challenges. The country applauded. But behind closed doors, he met with Otunba Kasim in an underground car park near Gudu. "They're won, dismantling our world," Barima said, voice low. "They've only pulled the curtain," Otunba replied. "The structure still stands, but for how long?" Barima handed him a small envelope. "Every judge with ties to Ekanem's files. I kept notes, in case." Otunba opened it, glanced through the names. "We'll take them out, one by one." Amaka, meanwhile, disappeared from Lagos. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said she had fled to London. Others swore they saw her in Abuja, moving from senator to senator, trying to buy protection. One particularly salacious blog claimed she was pregnant with a prominent North Central senator's child. Eno didn't care. Her focus had shifted. She locked herself in the hospital guest suite one evening and recorded a video. It wasn't flashy, no makeup, no prepared script, just her, a single bulb, and truth. "My name is Eno-Abasi Ekanem," she began, voice steady. "My mother was murdered for speaking out. I nearly died for trying to finish what she started." She named names, showed photos from the journal, referenced documents, property deeds, flight manifests. She made it personal, human, devastating. Tolu uploaded it anonymously to multiple international platforms. Within hours, it went viral. CNN picked it up, Al Jazeera, BBC Africa. Eno became a symbol not just of survival, but resistance. The EFCC responded by arresting over a dozen junior officials, clerks, assistants, middlemen. It was a performance, a gesture. The real kings remained untouched, but they were shaken. Tolu pushed deeper. He traced financial records and discovered a shell company in the Cayman Islands. It had funneled nearly 19 billion naira over 7 years, money tied directly to Otunba's charities, Barima's retirement fund, and Amaka's luxury properties. It was the kind of discovery that could burn everything, but the fire was already creeping toward Seyi. His company board summoned an emergency meeting. The accusations were veiled but sharp. "You've allowed your personal affairs to damage this institution. You're bleeding investor confidence." People are calling it Maidgate. Some of them were allies. Others had been waiting for this moment. They wanted him to step down, to protect the company. He didn't argue. The next morning, he walked into the boardroom wearing a dark gray agbada, calm and composed. In one hand, he held the flash drive. In the other, a sealed envelope. He placed both on the table. "This drive," he said, "holds enough evidence to destroy half the men funding this company's growth. But I won't use it here. Not for leverage, not for defense." He opened the envelope. His resignation letter. "I built this empire. I leave it now to save my soul." He turned, nodded at the silent board, and walked out. But he didn't go straight home. He drove to the shoreline, Saturday by the rocks, for hours, alone. When he finally returned to the apartment, Eno noticed something different, a quiet in his eyes, a distance. "You left the company," she said softly. "I had to." "There's something else," she pressed. "You're not telling me something." He looked at her, long and hard, then shook his head. "Not yet." What does Seyi know that he's not telling even Eno, and why is he walking away now? 6 months had passed. Lagos had changed, or at least pretended to. Government officials now mentioned transparency in their speeches. Youths marched in the streets holding placards with Eno-Abasi's face. Online, Hashtag still trended in her name. But behind tinted glass and mahogany doors, the old games continued, just with new players. And yet, on one particular evening, all of Lagos paused to look, because the maid had returned. But not as a maid. Eno stepped out of the black SUV at the entrance of the Victoria Island Civic Center. Flashbulbs exploded. Cameramen stumbled over each other. Eyes widened. She wore an emerald silk gown that shimmered like water under moonlight, designed by a Nigerian couturier now begging her for partnerships. Around her neck was a delicate diamond necklace, simple yet fierce. Her hair framed her face like a crown of coiled silk, and in her eyes burned a quiet fire that didn't need words to be understood. She was now CEO of the Ekanem Foundation, an advocacy group for domestic workers across Nigeria. With offices in Lagos, Port Harcourt, and even Accra, her organization had rescued over 200 girls from abuse and trained many more in vocational skills. Politicians who once mocked her now courted her. Multinationals offered sponsorships. The United Nations sent an invitation to Geneva, but none of that mattered to Eno that night. She stood on the ballroom floor, smile poised as donors mingled around her. Yet in her chest, something pulsed. Something missing. Seyi. After his resignation, he had vanished. No press releases, no social media. Just silence. Rumors suggested he was in Geneva, dismantling Otunba Kasim's offshore network. Others claimed he had fled Nigeria altogether. Eno never believed any of them. He was too much like her, unfinished. 2 nights after the gala, a white envelope slid under her apartment door. It had no stamp, no signature, just coordinates and a time, midnight. She traced it to a private dock in Lekki. At precisely 11:55 p.m., she stepped onto the yacht. The lights were dimmed, the sea calm and endless. Waiters in crisp white uniforms moved silently. Classical music flowed through hidden speakers. She expected Seyi, but what she saw froze her blood. Otunba Kasim, standing at the upper deck like a monarch, dressed in white linen, holding a glass of aged whiskey, and at his side, glittering like a serpent in gold, Amaka. Eno's breath caught. The laughter around her dimmed, her fists clenched inside silk gloves. Eno-Abasi, Otunba called, his voice oily. So good to see the girl who Nefen, rewrote Nigeria. Eno walked slowly toward him, spine straight. I must say, emerald suits you, Amaka said with a mock smile. Much better than those house uniforms. What is this? Eno asked flatly. A trap? Otunba chuckled. An opportunity to see what you've become. And to remind you, power doesn't die. It only changes its costume. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You think you've won? You think headlines and speeches erase 20 years of empire? You're just another name, my dear. And names fade. Eno tilted her head slightly. But guilt doesn't, and yours reeks. She didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice. Instead, she reached into her clutch, clicked a small button, and let it sit inside her palm. Hidden cameras disguised as necklace beads, rings, and even buttons on her dress had been recording from the moment she stepped aboard. I know about the shell companies, she continued calmly, about the military accounts in Geneva, about the deaths. Otunba smiled darkly. Prove it. You just did, she replied. In that moment, alarms blared. Flashing red lights lit up the yacht. Speedboats zoomed in from all directions. EFCC agents in bulletproof vests leapt onto the deck, guns raised. Everybody down! Panic exploded. Glasses fell, waiters ran, guests screamed, but Otunba didn't flinch. As agents swarmed, he moved toward the back of the yacht, where a private lifeboat already waited. Within seconds, he had disappeared into the night, flanked by armed men. Amaka was tackled to the floor, screaming as cuffs tightened around her wrists. You stupid girl, she spat at Eno. He'll find you. He'll finish what he started. Eno didn't blink. She left the yacht quietly as chaos continued behind her. By 4 a.m., she returned to her apartment, exhausted, silent, alone. She stepped inside, kicked off her heels, dropped the clutch, and froze. He was there. Sei, sitting on the edge of her couch, his shirt bloodied, his face gaunt, his right hand wrapped in bandages. But he was smiling. "I was watching," he said hoarsely. "You were perfect." Tears welled up in her eyes before she could stop them. "Where were you?" He stood, slowly, limping slightly. "Geneva, Dubai, Cape Verde. I've been everywhere." Otunba has tried to hide his sins. I've been pulling him apart one account at a time. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I almost died twice," he whispered. "But I kept hearing your voice." He opened the box. A simple diamond ring. Not big, not flashy, but radiant in its sincerity. "It's always been you," she cried as he slid it onto her finger. They held each other in silence. A kind of peace began to settle, until the phone rang. It was her grandmother. Eno answered, smiling through tears. "Obangawan," Mama Mfan said, voice shaking. "He's here." "Who?" "The man with the scarf. From your mother's funeral. He found us." But just as she accepts the ring, her grandmother calls, "He's here. He found us." The firelight flickered inside the ancestral shrine, casting long shadows on the three men seated on goat-hide stools, their faces obscured by the smoke of burning incense. Outside, thunder rolled like a drumbeat from the gods. The air was thick with secrecy, the kind of silence that bound souls together for better or worse. It was 1995. Justice Barima Enatimi, Otunba Kasim, Chief Dio Adesina Sei's father. They sat in a circle, their right thumbs sliced with a ceremonial blade. Blood dropped into a shared calabash filled with dark palm wine. "Nothing spoken here leaves this circle," Barima said solemnly. "We protect each other," Otunba added. "No matter what." Chief Dio hesitated, then nodded. "And if one of us betrays the other, he dies." They drank. That night, the blood pact was sealed. And so was their fate. Present day. Sei stood by the window, the early morning light brushing his face in gold. Eno sat across from him, her hands folded tightly, the silence between them heavy and brimming. "I need to show you something," she said. She placed a folder on the table, the cover marked with faded ink. Arit Ekanem. Confidential Notes, 1994, 1996. Inside were transcripts, notes, photographs. One in particular made Sei's knees weaken. His father, smiling, shaking hands with Barima and Otunba at a secret villa in Ibadan. "There was a pact," Eno said. "3 men. Your father was one of them." Sei sank into the chair. He tried to stop them. "He fought." "He did try," she interrupted gently. "But before that, he helped build it. The network, the money, the shell companies. He was part of the beginning." Tears welled in Sei's eyes. "I knew," he whispered. "I found an old letter once, buried in a safe. He said he regretted it, but I didn't want to believe it." Eno moved closer. "You're not him. But you need to stop running from his shadow." He nodded, broken but resolute. They barely had time to breathe before the phone rang. It was Mama Mfan's neighbor. "They took her," he said. 4 men, guns, no uniform. They left a note. The note was simple. "We want the original journal. 48 hours. Or she dies." Otunba had struck again. "No, I." Tolu, still recovering but sharper than ever, called an emergency meeting in a darkened back room of a bookstore on Awolowo Road. There, they devised a plan. "We fake the journal," Tolu said. "Give them a replica, stall them, track them, and when they come to collect, we end it." Eno bit her lip. "What if they kill her anyway?" "They won't," Sei said. "You have to trust me." The trade was arranged for 2 a.m. at an abandoned airstrip outside Badagry, a place where whispers of Biafran arms deals and buried coup secrets still echoed. Eno wore all black. The decoy journal was sealed in a battered brown envelope. Hidden beneath her coat was a GPS tracker wired into a necklace. In her boot, pepper spray, and in her pocket a voice recorder. Tolu and a small team of private security operatives, all off-duty DSS agents, waited in the shadows. The night air was thick with moisture. Crickets chirped like war drums. Then, headlights. Otunba arrived in a black armored van, flanked by 2 SUVs. He stepped out in full white agbada, arrogant as always. His eyes met Eno's across the distance. "No weapons," he called out. "No journal until I see her," Eno replied. From the van they dragged out Mama Mfon, weak, bruised, but alive. Eno ran forward, her eyes burning. Otunba stepped between them. "Hand it over." Eno passed him the envelope. He opened it, scanned a few pages, then paused. His eyes narrowed. "You think I'm a fool?" He tossed the fake journal on the tarmac. Gunshots cracked through the night. Chaos erupted. Tolu's men fired from the shadows. Barama, who had been hiding inside one of the SUVs, was hit in the leg as he tried to flee. Otunba ducked, diving behind a vehicle. Bullets rained. Tires burst. Screams echoed into the sky. In the confusion, Eno grabbed her grandmother and ran toward the brush, shielding her from stray fire. Otunba vanished into the night again, slipping away like a ghost, but not before one of Tolu's men clipped a small GPS tracker to his coat. By dawn, they were safe. Mama Mfon sat wrapped in a shawl, sipping hot pap from Eno's hands, her lips trembling. "You've become your mother," she whispered. "Maybe even stronger." The television blared in the corner. Breaking news. Otunba Kasim spotted entering ASO Rock presidential villa this morning under private escort. Footage showed him stepping out of a convoy, escorted by the president's chief of staff. Smiling. Untouched. Eno's heart dropped. "They're protecting him," she said, voice hoarse. "Or using him," Sei replied, darkly. "Either way, he's about to become untouchable." Is Otunba about to become untouchable with the full backing of the presidency? Lagos awoke to the announcement with disbelief, fury, and a hollow sense of déjà vu. Otunba Kasim appointed special advisor to the president on national strategy. A smiling photo accompanied the official press release. Flanked by the chief of staff and the minister of information, Otunba looked less like a criminal in hiding and more like a victorious king returning from exile. The position came with diplomatic immunity, an official convoy, and most importantly, protection from prosecution under Nigerian law. He had done it. He'd climbed out of the shadows and into the heart of the government. Barama didn't live to see it. 2 days after the airstrip ambush, Justice Barama Enetimi was found dead in a private clinic in Asokoro. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, but whispers told another story. An untraceable poison, brought in through the IV line. No witnesses. No CCTV. Sei and Eno watched the news in silence. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. They both knew Otunba had cleaned up his tracks. One by one. The calls started the next day. First, a cryptic voicemail. "You've had your moment, Eno-Abasi. Don't force us to make you vanish like your mother." Then, a typed letter slipped under the door of the Ekanem Foundation's Lagos office. "Deportation proceedings will be initiated if you fail to cease anti-government activities." It bore no official stamp, no signature, just a plain government watermark. Tolu, meanwhile, was arrested under fabricated fraud charges. They accused him of embezzling funds from a fictitious NGO. His bail was denied. The press didn't cover it. Most of them had already been silenced or bought. "Otunba has captured the state," Sei said bitterly. "And now he's buying time until the world forgets." But Eno wasn't ready to be forgotten. One night, from a secured, encrypted location, she recorded a 20-minute TED-style talk. She didn't name herself. She didn't even show her face. But her voice, strong, clear, and unyielding, carried her story to every corner of the world. She told of being a maid, of overhearing secrets meant to stay buried, of her mother's death, of judges and ministers trading bribes and blood, of how truth, in Nigeria, was not a weapon but a suicide note. The video went live at midnight. By morning, it had 4.3 million views. CNN called it the most haunting whistleblower testimony out of Africa in a decade. UNICEF issued a statement. Amnesty International demanded immediate inquiry. 3 foreign embassies, including the UK and Canada, imposed soft sanctions on Nigerian officials linked to the flash drive. Bank accounts were frozen. Visas were revoked. The National Assembly, under pressure from global media, convened an emergency session. A Senate inquiry was launched. On paper, it meant little. But symbolically, it was a crack in the armor. Then came the shocker. Amaka. She resurfaced under a cloak of anonymity, contacting Tolu's legal associate in Abuja. Bitter, betrayed, pregnant, and abandoned by Otunba, who had left her for a much younger mistress from Morocco. She agreed to testify. In secret. Inside a dim-lit room, she gave a full deposition to the Senate probe panel. She revealed documents linking Otunba's shell companies to international arms deals. She described how Barama rigged multiple judgments, laundering funds through boutique law firms. She named senators, governors, even cabinet members, all on Otunba's payroll. But most damning of all, she revealed Otunba's escape plan. A private jet. Midnight. Destination. Grenada. Once he lands, he disappears, she said. New passport, new identity, and he takes everything, billions. The panel went cold. But bureaucracy moved slowly. Too slowly. Back at the Ekanem Foundation, Eno watched the clock tick toward midnight. The airport was too vast, too corrupt, too protected. Even with Amaka's testimony, arrest warrants hadn't been signed. No police commissioner would risk stepping in without presidential approval, and that would never come. Eno turned to Seyi. He's going to get away. Seyi didn't respond. He was already on the phone. Otunba boards a private jet at midnight. Will they catch him in time? The rain was relentless. Sheets of water poured across the Lagos skyline, drumming against windshields, soaking the streets in a murky blur. Lightning flashed behind dark clouds as if heaven itself was watching, holding its breath. In a modest tech hub in Yaba, Seyi's fingers flew across a keyboard, eyes fixed on lines of code and data. Beside him, his childhood friend Timi, a quiet genius with a laugh like a whisper, nodded rapidly. We're in. The system was crude but functional, a direct tap into the air traffic control logs at Murtala Muhammad International Airport. Otunba's jet, registered under a dummy corporation in Panama, was scheduled for takeoff at 06 a.m. 6 minutes past midnight, Seyi muttered. Of course, a magician's hour. Timi typed in a code. The system gave them just enough control to freeze the clearance protocol, but not indefinitely. If we don't deliver a valid federal stop order in the next 30 minutes, Timi warned, the system auto-clears his flight. I'm working on it, Seyi said, pulling out his phone. Cross town, in Surulere, Eno-Abasi gripped the steering wheel of an old Toyota Corolla. Her grandmother's rosary swung wildly from the mirror as she dodged potholes and traffic, her eyes fixed on the time, 11:38 p.m. She clutched the envelope on the passenger seat, the final emergency warrant issued by a brave judge under pressure from the Senate Inquiry Committee. It was her last shot at stopping Otunba legally, but the rain slowed everything. Taxis stalled. Kiki drivers refused to move. Policemen waved her down at every junction. She didn't stop. At exactly 11:52 p.m., she skidded to a halt outside the airport's administrative terminal. Water soaked her dress, her hair, her heels, none of it mattered. She ran. Inside, airport security tried to stall her. She screamed, slammed the envelope onto the desk, and shouted the one sentence that made everyone freeze. He's about to flee with 19 billion naira in embezzled funds. If you let that plane leave, you're complicit. Silence. The officer on duty called someone. 5 minutes later, Otunba's jet was grounded. At 12:03 a.m., moments before takeoff, the convoy was surrounded. DSS officers stormed the tarmac. The pilot was yanked from the cockpit. The cabin was breached. And there, in the back lounge, sipping brandy and scrolling through a satellite phone, sat Otunba Kasim. calm, unbothered. But when he looked up and saw Eno drenched, breathless, and holding the warrant, his eyes narrowed. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed as the cuffs clicked into place. "They'll still remember me, not you." Eno stared him down. "They'll remember justice." By morning, every major television station in Nigeria was looping the same footage. Otunba, in handcuffs, escorted down the tarmac, face covered in shame, flanked by DSS agents. Justice finally had a face. That night, Eno stood alone in her apartment. No lights, just candles and silence. She pulled out an old VHS tape, one she had hidden for years, her mother's final court appearance, grainy and faded. Ekanem, dressed in Ankara, standing before the tribunal that would later dismiss her evidence. "If we pretend truth doesn't matter," her mother had said back then the next generation will never know how to fight. Eno let the tears fall. The circle had finally closed. Amaka was gone. No arrest, no public statements. Rumors placed her in a private estate in Enugu, possibly pregnant, possibly lost. But when the government offered to pursue her, Eno declined. "Let her live in her silence," she said. "That's punishment enough." Within 3 weeks, the Ekanem Foundation received over $12 million in international grants. Branches expanded to 6 new states. A mobile clinic was launched for domestic workers in rural communities. The face of the movement was no longer pity, it was power. Seyi, still healing but resolute, returned to tech. Not as a CEO, not with the flash of his past, but as a mentor, a builder, someone creating quietly behind the scenes. His new startup focused on transparency tools, apps that tracked government projects in real time. When asked why he didn't reclaim his old empire, he smiled and said, "Empires fall, purpose stays." The Adesina mansion, once a symbol of arrogance and secrets, was converted into a home for abused women and girls. The marble floors remained, but the rooms now echoed with laughter, healing, and hope. In a small ceremony, Eno cut the ribbon, tears streaming as she dedicated it to Maid Ekanem, whistleblower, mother, martyr. And Tolu, the man who had once been tortured and left for dead, stood on the Senate floor 6 months later, sworn in as a federal senator representing Akwa Ibom South. His first bill? The Domestic Workers Protection Act. It passed with resounding applause. On a humid Tuesday morning, Eno stood before a classroom full of young girls, a small, modest space in the heart of Ibadan. Most of them had been rescued from homes where they were treated like animals. Now, they sat in uniforms, holding notebooks, eyes wide with hope. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a white blouse and confidence. "I used to think being a maid meant being small," she said. "But I learned something. You're not just maids. Waiting to happen." The girls clapped. Then one raised her hand. Small, thin, no older than 10. She stood up slowly and said, "My mummy. She used to work in Abuja. For a big man." She said she knew Otumba too. But then, she disappeared. Eno's smile faded. Her eyes locked onto the child's. Something stirred in her chest. A young girl raises her hand and says, "I know a secret about my mother." The sun over Eko-Ekpene was softer than she remembered. Each December, Eno-Abasi returned to her roots, not for media, not for speeches, but for something deeper. The village that once whispered about her now gathered to welcome her. Women in wrappers danced. The old men in folding chairs nodded with quiet pride. But it was the children who mattered most to her now. At the edge of the village square stood a new building, bright, hopeful, alive with color, the Mfon Ekanem Learning Center, named after the grandmother who once sold vegetables to feed her, who had hidden her mother's journals beneath a floorboard, who had whispered stories of courage by candlelight. Inside, children read from donated books, tapped away on refurbished laptops, learned both coding and compassion. Eno sat among them every Christmas, teaching them that their voices, no matter how small, carried power. In Lagos, life had grown quieter but no less meaningful. Sei, her husband now, often said the greatest software he ever built was their home. Together, they raised twins, a boy named Arit and a girl named Mifon. Two hearts formed from pain and purpose, taught daily that courage did not begin in the courtroom, but in the everyday choices to tell the truth, even when no one listened. Sei had left behind the boardrooms and billion-naira deals. He now ran a non-profit tech incubator, teaching teenagers how to build tools that solved real Nigerian problems: waste management, transparency apps, food traceability. Eno, on the other hand, had become more than a name. She was now a global speaker. Her memoir, The Girl Who Whispered, Justice, translated into 12 languages. She stood on TED stages, addressed the African Union, advised the United Nations, but she never forgot. She still carried the necklace her mother once wore, still remembered the taste of tears on courtroom floors, still knew that justice, once won, needed to be protected. The little girl from Ibadan, the one who had spoken up about her missing mother, was now 17. Her name was Ruth. She became Eno's first official mentee. Fierce, focused, unafraid of hard truths. Ruth discovered that her mother had once worked for a bank laundering funds for Otunba's early businesses. When she threatened to expose them, she vanished, declared runaway and forgotten. Eno made a promise to her. Your story will not end in silence. Together, they started Project Ruth, a platform where children of the disappeared could share their truths, search records, and connect dots that had once been buried by fear. One spring, a documentary titled Whispers That Roared premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. It chronicled Eno's journey from village maid to global activist. The footage was raw courtroom drama, death threats, confessions, but also hope. The women she had helped, the girls now graduating, the men who once doubted her, now standing behind her. The film went viral, it won awards, but more importantly, it reopened wounds and inspired healing. Emails flooded in, from daughters, from mothers, from wives who had lived under fists and secrets. One message, however, didn't come digitally. It arrived by courier, no name, no return address, just a brown envelope. Inside were old Polaroids, women, some smiling, some bruised, all now confirmed dead or missing. On the back of one photo, they tried to tell their stories. But Otunba wasn't the only one. Eno sat in silence for hours, staring at them. Ghosts, voices that had never made it to the surface. She turned to her desk, opened a new file, typed one sentence at the top, whispers that roared. The room was quiet. Outside, Lagos buzzed on. In the distance, thunder rolled. But she felt no fear, not anymore. She turned to her daughter, who had been watching from the doorway. Mummy, were you really a maid? Eno smiled gently. They thought I was a maid, she said, pulling her child close. They forgot I was also a daughter. They thought I was a maid. They forgot I was also a daughter. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these powerful voices alive. What would you do if you uncovered a secret that could shake an empire? Comment below, your thoughts matter more than you know. And remember, every whisper counts. Turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next story that dares to speak.